Budget matters, yes. Right now we are delving inside tourism, culture and the arts with Tenisha Brown-Williams, who is a tourism educator, researcher and practitioner for over 10 years. We are also joined this evening by Lyons, the musical director and the lead in Freetown Collective, which also makes him an artist, activist and so much more. We want to say thank you so much for joining us this evening. And Tenisha, ladies first, of course. Lou, I know you understand. Tenisha, we want to start with you, thank you, and ask you your thoughts on the move to group tourism or the Ministry of Tourism with culture and the arts.
Sure, thanks for having me. I think it's a small step in the right direction. It is international best practice to pair tourism with other sectors of the economy. So I would say it's a small step in the right direction that the government took with that decision. Yeah.
And Lou, I'll get to you actually on your program, Full Disclosure Radio, check it out on IG, you spoke to previous models that Trinidad and Tobago can draw from, as opposed to trying to reinvent a wheel. Give us a little synopsis of that, thank you.
Yeah, I found the grouping of these portfolios very interesting. And so I did some digging and I realized that Ghana, Lagos, Sarawak, and Malaysia all have permanently grouped their ministries together in a very similar fashion because they wanted to pivot their economies to get the most out of tourism. What are you going to sell to visitors? You're selling your identity, which involves your culture and the arts. So once I realized that this is, as Tenisha said, international best practice, I was relieved.
Now, Tenisha, in terms of the impact of the arts on tourism, because Lou started to speak about it, when you get the people here, or to encourage the people here, to entice them to say, hey, that going on there, I want to visit. What are some of the impacts of the arts on tourism?
Well, certainly, tourism, when we look at some of the tourism products that are sold internationally, certainly the culture and the arts are part and parcel of what is packaged as a tourism product. And if I could just expand on what we define as culture, it's both natural culture and it's also built culture. It's culture that is intangible and it's culture that is tangible. And I think we would agree that Trinidad and Tobago, if we compare ourselves with other Caribbean islands, has a very strong and unique culture in the way that we relate to one another in terms of how we eat. I think one of our key cultural items is our food, which is known globally. The other part, of course, is our soca, is our calypso, our carnival, so that any visitor coming to Trinidad and Tobago, I think at the top of their mind is to have that cultural experience or interaction with those products. And just to expand a bit on the natural, cultural or heritage assets that we have, sometimes we don't see that places like the Labray Pitch Lake, which is the largest pitch lake in the world, is part of our natural culture. The Carney Swamp is part of our natural culture. And in fact, the Carney Swamp is one of the most traversed tourism sites in Trinidad. And so certainly when we talk about tourism and the impact that it has on culture and the impact that culture has on tourism, what I can say is a symbiotic relationship, which is beneficial in that relationship.
And Lou, I'll ask you to come in momentarily, but before you come in though, and after your answer, Lou, Tenisha, you may want to come back in because I want to lay another bit of context in terms of the impact of the arts on tourism and possibly even just society. But we play this clip from Isoke Edwards on the role of the arts in society.
And the function of art is to make us comfortable enough, to get us to a space comfortable enough to deal with those issues, you know, in a very neutral space, in a space that is kind of entertaining so that we are able to laugh at things and have a good discussion about things without the antagonistic aspect. And that's why it's so important for us to put our resources in fine arts. It is essential. It goes to the crux of our social issues. And we talk about tools and having enough tools in our toolbox to deal with these things. And art is that tool.
Now, Lou, I see you nodding as though you want to make a little contribution in Isoke's offertory plate. How would you add to that line of reasoning from Isoke?
Yeah, man, I would just like to echo that with some wise words from the late Pat Bishop. She once said that art is the well-doing of anything that needs to be done. And if that is the kind of outlook we have as to what art is, then we could understand that while we have the leisure side of tourism, we also have the business or the technical side of tourism. And art complements that once we are able to proliferate our ideas and perfect what we need to do. Small example, steel pan. Trinidad is the land of steel pan. So how do we make steel pan sound the best it can sound? And we're talking about arrangers, tuners, audio engineers, players. I mean, so you're introducing a cycle where iron sharpens iron.
And Tenisha, I didn't play the clip before. Is there anything that the clip makes you want to expand on or add or complement with?
Yes, definitely. So I think we could all agree that tourism is about people. And as the clip said, it's about who we are, it's our social constructs and so forth. This year, the World Tourism Organization, for its World Tourism Day celebration, which occurred last week, Sunday, around the theme rural development and tourism, speaks to the cultural assets that reside in rural communities. And just on the point that Lou made with regards to the business of culture and art, when we talk about tourism in a rural environment, we speak about monetizing the cultural assets that those rural communities have to offer. So, for example, actually I have two examples, one in Trinidad, one in Tobago. So in Trinidad, we have a really good example in the Matura area, which is known for turtle watching. But they have managed to pair tourism with the environment, but also with their cultural practices of making authentic souvenirs, jewelry from discarded items, such as glass bottles. So now they're into making or leveraging on that skill, that cultural skill that is resident within the community, and they are monetizing that asset and that skill to sell to visitors when they get to that location. Secondly, we have the example of the Castara area in Tobago. It's a wonderful example of rural tourism development, wherein they have managed to leverage their natural cultural assets, their beaches, etc., with their way of life, the homemade ice cream, the dirt oven produce that they make every single day, which is bread, sweet bread, so forth. So they have been able to monetize their cultural assets. Now, the thing is, in tourism, we have to be careful of something called commoditization, where if we overstress on monetizing those assets, we can lose the authenticity. So that's something that we have to guard against when we talk about tourism and culture.
And definitely, no, when you say Castara, Castara has my heart. So I speak the name with reverential tones. But I also appreciate the fact that both of you, in different words, were speaking about who am I? How do I articulate self? But we continue with that conversation when we return. We're speaking with Lou Lyons and Tenisha Brown. Stay with us.
One of the things that we have to address as a people is the respect for the value of art in Trinidad and Tobago. It is very much a cultural thing, height of irony. It's very much a cultural thing that we see art as an afterthought. No one in the government echelons, and it trickles right down to the mentality of the people, not enough people see the value of art. They just see it as, you know, some hobbyist endeavor.
Short but pithy statement from Conrad Paris. Welcome back. We are speaking with Lyons as well as Tenisha Brown-Williams about the budget and how it matters, how it applies with a focus on tourism, culture, and the arts. Now, Lou, with an idea or focus on continuing to draft policy to inform models for tourism, culture, and the arts, how do we articulate that kind of, how do we articulate that if our mind not right? Because according to Conrad, the irony, the height of irony, that is a cultural thing that we treat arts and culture like is a thing is the only side. So how do we start to change that narrative so that we can move forward in a way that benefits us all?
I must say that we have already begun walking in the right direction, and I would like to point to the National Artist Registry of Trinidad and Tobago, which represents an attempt to collate information from practitioners who are in several artistic or creative fields. So one, I would say that there may have been lack of representative policies because there may have been a deficit in information to furnish those policies in a way that would be applicable top-down. But now there is an attempt to incentivize artists to be a part of the registry. And if we really want to see that kind of change, that kind of respect, cultural respect that we are asking for, then one of the things we as artists have to do is start registering. Visibility is important. Metadata as to how we go about our creative careers is important. That kind of data is what drives the policies in the right direction.
And once again, putting a plug out for Full Disclosure Radio, because you've spoken to that as well. So if you're not doing nothing, why are you saying something and say, well, why they not doing nothing? So in terms of like being part of the change that you want to see and being part of that change, Tenisha, you're saying that you believe tourism is a powerful social transformation tool. Break that down for me now, because that sounds exciting.
Sure, certainly. Just to share some data with you, so in 2019, the world tourism or tourism activities globally would have contributed a total of $9 trillion, which in effect makes the sector nearly 3 times larger than agriculture, the financial services, and health and technology. And in fact, 1 in every 4 jobs created worldwide is done so by the travel and tourism sector. And we can appreciate that employment in this sector extends to low-skilled workers as well as skilled workers. Let me just get into some of the Trinidad data with regards to employment. So for 2019, the World Travel and Tourism Council in their economic report would have indicated that directly about 18,000 jobs are created by the tourism sector, which accounts for 2.8% of total employment. I want to just add as well that in 2019, we saw a $12.5 billion contribution from this industry, which represents 7.8% of our GDP. So I'm saying all of that to say that globally, tourism is a very lucrative sector that is able to provide a wide scale of opportunities with regards to employment. And in the Caribbean alone, which is very heavily dependent on tourism, we would have seen growth in 2019 of 4.4%, which outpaced the global economic growth in terms of tourism of 3.5, and certainly would have contributed to multiple jobs throughout the region. So when I talk about tourism being a very powerful social tool, I speak to the ability to change livelihoods. And if we connect it to culture and the arts, as I said, in rural communities, it's a form of employment for women, for the youth, leveraging the skills that they have in relation to their cultural assets.
And you said Trinidad just now. I'm wondering if you have different data for Trinidad versus Tobago, because even though you spoke about the Pitch Lake, you spoke about the Caroni Swamp, At the same time, it's different types of tourism that we see between Trinidad and Tobago. And we also have the very sad, very truthful bacchanal that because Tobago is part of Trinidad and Tobago, Tobago is not able to access that Caribbean bubble or that CARICOM bubble at this point in time.
Yes, because of COVID, but I want to just answer your question indirectly and sort of demystify the thoughts that we have that COVID has actually led us to this point. I want to say very emphatically that prior to COVID-19, our tourism sector for both Trinidad and Tobago was trending downwards. There's evidence that shows that from 2016 to 2018, there was an approximate decrease of 15% in arrivals. And in 2019, a very minute increase. So that we have been struggling pre-COVID with regards to our tourism development, which includes Tobago, both Trinidad and Tobago. And I just wanted to clarify that, yes, COVID has further compounded the situation, but let us be clear that we weren't performing very well as a local tourism sector prior to COVID, while the rest of our Caribbean neighbors were experiencing positive growth.
And we actually see some of that information that you were just citing in terms of the arrivals to Trinidad and Tobago between 2015 and 2019, including that slight uptick in 2019. But in terms of looking at how we're pivoting, when we say pivot, what does the face of tourism look like if you're forecasting a little bit, Tenisha?
Sure, and I'll make reference to international forecasts. So obviously, there are, when you look at the various reports, we are not in the best position globally with regards to tourism because the travel industry was the first to be impacted by the pandemic. Current forecast sees recovery going into end of 2021 into 2022, specifically in terms of hotel recovery. There's data that is showing that hotels would start to experience some ray of hope at the end of 2021 into 2022. And then other predictions are forecasting 2023. The IDB released a document last week that spoke to the impact of COVID-19 on Latin America and the Caribbean tourism. And if you look at that document, you really see the impact. So for example, there are some economies such as in Aruba where 84% of their GDP comes from tourism. And the forecast is for at the end of 2020 is literally that being decreased to 12%. So we can appreciate the huge impact. Now, having said that, one could say very easily that tourism is dead. And why should any government at this point, try to invest in the sector and so forth? My response to that is why not? And for Trinidad and Tobago, I think it's safe to say that even when our oil and gas industry is not performing well, we still invest in that sector because we see merit in it. And so if we look at, I just wanted to make reference to the Travel and Tourism Competitiveness Index and really give us a way forward. What I'm trying to say is that if we determine that tourism is important, we can also agree that eventually the sector will recover at some point in time. And is it worth paying our attention to it now? And traditionally, when you look at the Travel and Tourism Index Competitiveness Report for Trinidad and Tobago, which assesses Trinidad, each destination on 14 points. One of the points relates to the prioritization of tourism by a government. And sadly, over a period of time, successive administrations, we have always ranked very low on that particular indicator in relation to tourism competitiveness. So I'm saying that let's start with, yes, recognizing that we're in a hard place with tourism, but also recognizing that it will eventually recover. The Caribbean Tourism Association has already started to release data that winter bookings for some of the Caribbean hotels are already pre-bookings, that is already at 40 to 50%. So guess what? There is an intent to travel, and people will begin to travel at some point. What we have...
That we are at the end of this conversation. The good news is that this was just part one, because we didn't start to talk about budget allocations yet. So thank you so much for joining us, and we say good night.